Yes, hello, dear. This is the Ninth Dimensional Pleiadian Collective, and it is a pleasure and an honor to have the opportunity to connect with you. So we're going to cover quite a bit of ground in a short amount of time, and anything you need to know we'll make sure we include in our conversation. But we always like to start with your first question. So how may we best be of service to you today?
Okay, well, I'd like to say hello to you, and I'm researching the event of Jonestown.
Yes.
And I'd like to know, my first question is, okay, there was a tape in Jonestown that the FBI has that they've cataloged as being recorded the morning after the massacre. And I was wondering if you could shed any insight on what exactly that tape was. Can you give me anything on that, what that tape was about?
Some of it had to do with... Some of it had to do with the perspective of what was left behind, just the ramifications of all of that. Some of it was also recording done of what was catalogued itself, and some of the esoteric principles and beliefs that were being, we'll say, touted. That's the best way to describe it. So it was kind of a mixture of things, and not necessarily left for the general public and general consumption. There was a lot of fear around what would happen if some of the information would get out, for two reasons. One, just to give credence to what happened, and to lend more energy to it, to more power to others who might want to follow in the steps. And that really was the second piece here, for others who might want to follow after.
Right. Okay. I was wondering, there's a lot of speculation around, like, mercenaries or Green Berets and are maybe some sort of splinter militant forces that were part of some sort of contingency plan to basically shut Jonestown down and sort of rewrite history, like move the bodies around. A lot of the bodies, they're all face down, and it's just sort of like there's a heavy presence that somebody else was there very heavily, and, you know, kind of that was all none of it was put into the books, so to speak.
Well, as we said, there was a lot of fear about how it would be perceived,
right?
And those who would want to follow, perhaps in footsteps. So some of that video, as we said, it is also those who came after, and there were some who survived, not many.
Right.
So was it staged and manipulated? Not in the way that you might think, as many things are done today with your governments. It wasn't done so much for the purposes of manipulating the consciousness of people, but rather it was, a lot of it was left as it was, but as it was shown or displayed, well, as it wasn't shown or displayed, that's the more important piece. What we mean by that is that it wasn't manipulated, the bodies are manipulated. A lot of that was as it was. It was shown as it was. And there was certainly a heaviness about the area itself, simply from the massive death and the energy.
Uh-huh.
Did we answer your question there? We think we did, but
yes,
is there more there?
Yes. Okay, I was wondering, I noticed that the man, Jim, they call it Jim Jones, he through the history of the People's Temple in Jonestown, I noticed that it appears to be different individuals, like the ears are different, the nose are different, and one of the people who survived in Jonestown, they said that he liked to use, like, body doubles or stand-ins and stuff like that. And I talked to that Treb, and I mean, I sent some writing to Treb, some questions, and Treb was saying how there might have been two Jim Joneses that were left behind and two escaped somehow. But he was saying that, and I was wondering, like, could you guys pick up on anything about that, about like lookalikes or body doubles? Do you guys have any impression of that?
To some extent, we would say yes. There are others that would be stand-ins, but also what was seen also has to do with the energies that he allowed himself to align with. So, right. in some ways, he was a puppet for beings that were just outside of your visual range. And depending on who his puppet master was, that could change the physical appearance to some extent because of the extra energy running through the body. So things could appear slightly different. So while the potential for body doubles is there and were occasionally used, some of the video, it is him, it's just different energy that's also coming through with him that makes him appear slightly different.
Yeah, that was another question I was going to ask you. I was wondering, like, a lot of these events, like the Manson family, Jonestown, the Zodiac Killer and stuff, it almost appears, like, I have sort of impression that, like, groups like maybe the ancient reptilians and these different types of groups, on some level, are, like, architecting these things through humans on Earth, and they're helping to arrange this maybe to sustain their existence on the sixth density?
To some extent, yes, because they feed off of that energy, and it goes part and parcel with the grand plan, where you have free will, and you need someone to be a victim and someone to play a perpetrator, and it's the interdimensional aspect of the game. So there are beings who still to this day with the major things going on the planet, they are working with individuals who are in human form, and they are making suggestions, and they are able to see things from a slightly different perspective. Sometimes that does mean timelines, different potential realities, and they are skewing things towards their favor, but it has to be done with the free will of the human. And many are choosing to abdicate their discernment, as it were. And sometimes it's not even the discernment. They're just willing to go to that dark space. And so certainly there are interdimensionals who are playing around in your reality.
Right.
Now, when someone goes to the dark side of experience, when they really start working with a lot of the fear, a lot of the dark energy, and suppressing the divine nature, it opens up within them the potential for those lower interdimensionals to connect very easily with them. They're very easily manipulated. They're very easy to connect to. So it's like a grand invitation, and so lots of lower entities and energies start showing up. Yeah,
that's something I realized is like a lot of things that happen is energetic on an energetic level. Are there entities who try to like cover things up so other entities later on can't look into it and see? Like, do they cover their tracks, like the interdimensional type of beings? Do they try to hide their steps?
Just in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Because so much of it, because how you have been socially conditioned, seems so fantastical that you can't imagine that would be part of your reality. Your true history has been suppressed. So even the idea of an ET for many is just so far out there they can't go. So any sort of story is going to be taken as a joke. Any sort of ET report. And so from that standpoint, they're able to kind of cover the tracks because it sounds so fantastical. But in some ways, it doesn't really matter to them because they are using the human. And if that one fails and dies, then they go to another.
Right.
So in their perspective of humans is that they don't have a whole lot of value. So they don't really care.
Yeah. There was some murders that happened back in the late 60s. Allegedly, a cult had did it. There's this a man named Charles Manson. They're saying he was a part of a cult, and he was involved with the murder of this movie star. And I'm coming from a conspiracy research angle, and I'm finding a lot of weird connections that, it doesn't look so much like he did this by himself. It looks like this was done with the help of, an intelligence network.
Yes, and you'll see that with many things. and the blame will get placed elsewhere, and especially for those who have already been labeled as one who does negative deeds. All right, so if you're already considered a mass murderer, let's just reframe it and hang it on you. There are many instances where there have been patsies in your history. You know, the example of your President Kennedy, for one, and who's really pulling the strings. If you look into a lot of that, especially even with Manson, you will find that a lot of the people who have created a lot of the cover-ups and some of the governmental programs for what we will call mind control, they're all connected. They're all connected. It's part of that same game. And sometimes what will happen is that one will be a part of those programs and working with the mind control, and they will snap. The mind will break.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
And unfortunately, you see it more often than you might even recognize. You see it in a lot of Hollywood.
Right.
But if you start looking at a lot of the major events and the things that just seem a little off, you'll see that a lot of these agencies, and if you want to call them control agencies, and these are the families, most of them are in the background, and most of the names you don't even know.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not family names that you would be familiar with, and they're the ones that are at the top echelon, and they're also the ones that are working interdimensionally.
Yeah, well, you know, that's one thing I discovered with this Jonestown thing is a lot of, like, not even just the central, like, people try to say it's all the CIA or something. I notice there's always so many different groups involved, and I noticed the psychiatric doctors, like, there's this place in the prison system called Vacaville, and I noticed, like, with the SLA, the kidnapping of Patty Hearst, and a lot of different things, it seems like I kind of termed to myself the Vacaville Mafia, because it seems like there's a bunch of psychiatrists who are behind all these criminals doing all these big things.
Well, it's their experiments, yes, and they've been set out on society to see how they play out.
Right.
And again, is what we were saying, these interdimensionals, they don't really care about the human condition, and those at the top, they are satisfied with their power, so you know they are in a sense kind of directing that energy, and again letting loose that energy, that fear-based energy. It keeps the masses in fear, so a lot of the stories get spun through your media to keep the masses in fear from feeling autonomous, from feeling empowered to feeling self-expressive, and by doing that, it keeps those in power, right? Because nobody's really complaining because they're in too much fear.
Yeah, you know, I met this. I was going to this bank, and there was an individual there. It was a female, and she was extremely slender and blonde, and the way she moved and everything, I knew from my study of trying to visualize, like, the Earth reptilians and stuff, I spotted immediately that this wasn't a human, or was a human with a very strong energy of the Earth reptilians. And I basically confronted her on it. I was alone in a room with her, and I started telling her about the lizard people underneath Los Angeles and the Anunnaki and all this stuff, and I could tell she knew exactly what I was talking about. And it was almost like she was wearing like a holographic shield. She didn't emotionally react to it, but I could see that she became aware that I knew she wasn't who she was projecting herself to be. And she even changed the bank. She left the bank. I brought a Esasani stone in there, one of those things from Bashar, and I put it on the table, and she studied it. You know, it really didn't mean anything to her that much, but she studied it, and it became like we were so aware of each other's presence. She just disappeared from the bank. I never saw her again. You know, I was wondering, could you shed some insight on that, possibly? Am I accurate in that? Or?
Well, it's important for you to trust in your intuition and in your instinct in that, because, and you are correct, sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's energetic. Sometimes beings will carry a lot of that energy with them, even though they may choose, say, a humanoid form. They're carrying a lot of that in the energetic field to play out the issues of that species. We would say, in this particular instance, a lot of it there's some of it was genetic. We would say most of it was energetic, but she did have an awareness of exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah.
So
I felt that.
So it is important for you to start trusting in your intuition, and it's not always important that you get the final answer, because many times you're not going to get it in the way that the ego might like it. But what you'll start to notice are patterns in the energies and how they feel, and then the more you experience it, the more important it becomes for you to pay attention, to say, oh, no, I felt this twice, and each time this is what I've thought, so I know this is going on. You will have a certainty within yourself. There is a difference between the physical presence and the energetic. In the physical presence, for you as a sensitive, it's going to feel like the joy got sucked out of the room. It's going to feel very heavy and very depressing. You will feel it in an emotional way, more so than someone who's just carrying the records in the field. They feel a bit off, and it feels like they're aligned with that energy. Having said that, with the reptilians, it is important for you to know that there are both positive and negative that are inhabiting your planet right now.
Yeah.
And some of the positive ones, it's a mix where they're from. Some are from Pleiades, some are from Sirius, but most of what you will encounter on your planet, it has a bit of a heavier, darker energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They connect a little bit more with sort of like the conquer and divide type of mentality they might have. Yes,
when it comes to the reptilians and the draconians, their energy is very family oriented in a sense, bloodline oriented.
Like so, the mob almost.
Yes, if you are outside of the bloodline, you're the enemy. So it's very cliquish, if you will, very tight-knit, but even within that, there's a lot of competition. So it's about who holds the power. So it's very hierarchical in their structure, both the reptilians and the draconians.
Yeah, so do they own different groups, like different groups of humans? Do they claim ownership of different groups, like different types of reptilians and stuff, too?
Do the reptilians do that? The draconians do that? We're not sure who you're asking. Who they?
Yeah, like the Earth reptilians or the draconian stuff, do they like pick and choose different groups of humans to try to do stuff on and make them fight against each other?
It usually has to do with the bloodline, because it's easier to control and manipulate. There's a genetic connection. And when something has been done for thousands of years through a bloodline, it's in the DNA record, so it makes it much easier to do it to any offspring. You've probably heard us talk in the past about how, when you learn something, when you're able to integrate something, you send the information off to your entire genetic line. The same thing happens when you have a negative experience. If you have a great fear-based experience, that gets sent off to your genetic line. All that information gets shared. So when it comes to working for a very long time with those beings, with the bloodlines, it gets much, much easier to manipulate them. And especially because many of them, from a young age, have been conditioned. And this is true for various ET races that interact with you. They will stick with a particular bloodline, a particular group, because of connections sometimes to their species, and then they will stick with the family. All right, because if they've worked with a family member several hundred years ago, that information is still contained within the genetic record.
Yeah, I've noticed that some people seem more, they have more of a hold on them. It's more the energy, like entities, like, people traditionally call them demons, but, negative entities have tight holds on some people. And, it's difficult for them to get out of it almost.
Well, and it also there are two reasons for that. One, a lot of that's set up in childhood. A lot of reinforcement of the negative in childhood. You're not good enough, you're not deserving, you're not worthy, who are you? that gets strongly reinforced, and most often in abusive households. For others, it's also the fact that you have to hold a lot of fear in your field in order for that to go on. Some people can process through their traumatic childhood, and then it's not a problem. They're carrying more light. And here's the thing, when it comes to light and dark, it's not about one extinguishing the other. It's about releasing fear. It's about acceptance. The best way for you to deal with the dark is simply to accept them for who they are, not to want to combat them, but to allow them to be. It doesn't mean that you want to go down to that frequency and play with them. You're choosing to have a different version of reality for yourself. But it's not to hate them, not to fear them, because that will just tie you right into their vibrational level, so that you do have an experience with them, so that you can let it go.
I've noticed that I learn a lot. Like I was doing my research last night and early this morning, and I was listening to speeches by the People's Temple and the Jim Jones, and it was similar to when I used to listen to that Charles Manson guy, and I was doing my conspiracy research on it, and I had to listen to what these people had to say. And even though they were in the dark light, a lot of it was extremely intelligent.
Yes.
What they were saying.
Well, and that's the thing, and you still see it today. If you want people to follow you, you have to give them truth, and then you just color it with a bit of what you want and manipulate them in the way that you want. But because if you told someone a bold-faced lie, they would know it. So it is about being very seductive, and what you will find is that most of those who are cult leaders or mass murderers or even serial killers, they're usually very charismatic and very seductive, and they're able to draw people in. If that quality wasn't there, people would not be in their frequency. So they got very good at reading human nature and manipulation of that. So, a lot of the dark, it's not that the information is any different than the light. It's how it's used. The information itself is neutral. The difference between light and dark is that dark uses the energy for personal gain and power. Light uses it for the benefit of self and all others.
Yeah, it's like it's filtered through same thing, just through two different belief systems, almost like. Exactly.
That's exactly what it is. It's one for personal gain and the other's for the collective gain. That's the only difference really between light and dark.
I went and I did this channeling session with Daryl Anka on the Bashar a couple years ago, and I was asking him all these questions about being watched, I was asking him questions about the Central Intelligence Agency stuff and being watched, and I had some sort of experiences where it's like this the agency or the entities behind the agency sort of in a sense revealed themselves to me a little bit, and I'm wondering, do these entities, do they look into what I'm talking about in my research at all, do you think?
To some extent, yes. At this point, everything all of you do in the United States is monitored.
Right.
You have very little privacy. It is far more incursive and invasive than you might even begin to imagine. If most of your populace knew what was really going on and how much you were being monitored, there would be riots in the street. So yes, all of that is observed, and it's really important for you to know that you create your reality. You deem what you decide to play with. So if you need persecution, then you will create a situation and scenario where you're being monitored and persecuted. If you clear and integrate that within yourself, that will never be a problem.
Well, the police, they picked me up, they pulled me over one time. I was walking, this was a few years ago, and they asked me my name, and I felt like I was being bullied, and I wouldn't agree to anything. And they eventually took me to the jail, and I said, I'm not going to sign anything, I don't agree to nothing. And it's like the whole system collapsed, because I wasn't agreeing to, they said, who are you? And I made up a new name, and I said, well, I'm this other person. And they showed me a picture of my old self, like myself, and I said, that's not me, that's a picture. How can I be a picture? And I stopped agreeing to everything they were going along with, and it's like all their authority collapsed. and they didn't know what to do.
Well, again, as you create your reality, what you're willing to play in and what you're willing not to play in determines how it goes. When there's nothing to push against, when there's no attraction there because you're not playing the same frequency out, it disintegrates. You can't fight anymore. You can only fight if you're on the same wavelength, like attracts like. If you've got two different frequencies, they just can't interact.
Yeah, a friend of mine, he's an older gentleman, but his name is Jordan Maxwell, and I have been studying under a lot of his teachings for a long time, and I learned that through agreements, that's how the law works. Like, I have to contract with them, contract with them, and I stopped doing that, but they knew this. They knew, like, the judge in the system, they knew I had to agree to it. And it revealed to me, like, all that stuff I had been studying about the secret societies and all that stuff. It's like these people knew all that stuff the whole time.
Yes.
They were playing.
They're hoping you don't know.
Yeah, they were playing me. It was weird.
Well, we would say it's the same thing, as above, so below. So, in a sense, this is how it works energetically. You can only experience what you agree vibrationally to be in alignment with, and then your law system is somewhat a reflection of that, and you have to agree, and the way it is written in your laws.
Yeah, I've seen that, how the different things that the judge represents, or like there's a jury of 12, and you see 12 played out, like a 12-step program, 12 grades in high school. The 12, they play the 12 out, and everything about the law system is based on these these numbers. I don't know, I can't explain that good.
Well, your system is based on 12. This entire, the universal game is based on 12. And 12 and 13 are very powerful numbers. The 12 combine to form the 1, which is the 13th. That's why 13th is such a powerful number. And that's why it's made to be unlucky. But it's coded. So you'll see a lot of things that are 12s. 12 is very, very powerful in your system.
I was just doing, right before I called you, I was doing this density class with that Rob Goff guy, and he was just talking with this entity named Artif or something like that, and they were just talking about that 12. That's synchronistic for you to say that.
Just note that. Pay more attention to it.
Yeah. Well, hey, the time is about running up, so...
Well, we've got time for one more quick question if you've got it.
Okay, one more quick question. Okay, I want to ask you, is it possible at some point for an entity such as myself to channel an agency such as like the Central Intelligence Agency? Could I channel that as a living entity and get that extract information from it?
The first question would be why?
Information from my studies.
What we would say, it's not even about that. It would be going to the original incident. It would be going to... It wouldn't be you channeling the agency as an entity. It would be you accessing records of experiences that were had. So if you wanted to know about, say, the video as it was recorded, you would go to the experience of the beings who were recording the video, what they saw, what they experienced. You wouldn't need to go to an agency. So this is about you learning how to access the Akashic realm. Now, whether you want to channel or access the Akashic realm, it's the same thing. It's about learning to read frequency. It's about opening yourself up and then accessing different levels of frequency. There's really nothing that you don't have access to in the Akashic realm as far as your history goes and everything that's happened on the planet. The problem is you have too many fear programs in place, all of you, to really fully access it, and it just takes practice. So the first thing we would say is to set your intention of you wanting to access the Akashic realm. The second thing is to practice putting yourself in your heart center, all right, learning how to get out of the mind and move into the heart. and then asking your question, being as specific as you can be. And there are beings in the Akashic realms, and in a way they are librarians, and they will help you find specific records of information. Here's the other thing. When it comes to reading records, it gets very tricky because there are infinite versions of reality. So which version are you going to go and access? The idea of timelines, the way that they exist in the human mind, reality doesn't really exist that way. You move from now moment to now moment to now moment, and you string them together, and you call it a timeline, but yours may look vastly different than someone else's. Yours may have a different pattern. It may look like a mountain if you were to look at it in a linear graph form, where somebody else might look like it goes into a valley and stays down in the valley for a while and then comes back up, but you share a point, a now moment, that you say, this is my quote-unquote timeline, but it doesn't really exist that way. So which version are you going to take is the one that resonates with you as truth from the perspective and the moment that you're asking the question. And there are librarians who can help you to find specifically that information. So you can call on the librarians. We would also say listen for the answer. It will feel very subtle when you first start. It is not going to feel so vastly different than your imagination, and that is probably the hardest part for you all, that you're expecting it to be dramatically different. And it's rare that it feels dramatically different. You might have a handful of experiences in your life where you knew with absolute certainty that that was vastly different than your imagination. What you will experience in the moment is a certain sense of claircognizance, a knowing that that's the truth. The problem is, after that, you tend to bring it back to your reality, and then you start picking it apart with the mind. But in that moment, you have certainty, and that's what comes with practice, is the awareness of this certainty. All right, so that when you come back to the mind, you say, I remember that feeling and I need to go with it. That is being truth because it resonated so deeply with me. And then if you need confirmation, ask for it. Ask to be shown by your guides. You can call on us to put the confirmation in your field. We may do it through a book or through symbols or someone else overhearing a conversation. Just as you received 2 instances of the number 12 today, those are things to pay attention to. And if you wonder, is this my sign or my confirmation, take it as such. All right? Because otherwise it wouldn't even pop into your mind that it might be. So we hope that helps you.
It does. Thank you.
And have fun with it. All right? Remember that, truth is not an absolute. It is always colored by perspective. And which perspective, what degree, what angle are you looking at things from? And that becomes very important, especially when you're trying to find the quote-unquote truth, because that can make you go nuts trying to get to the bottom of something that seems ever elusive. Take it for what it is today, what resonates with you as truth, what resonates tomorrow, maybe something vastly different. So we'll leave you with that. Feel free to call on us directly. You don't need Wendy. You can go through the process we just described. Put yourself in your heart center. And until then, we will be watching and waiting and sending many, many well wishes.
Okay. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant time.
It's our pleasure, dear.